Welcome to the Republican Rundown. My name is Tommy Pigott. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications here at the Republican National Committee.
Hey everybody, it's Madison Gesiotto Gilbert, RNC National Spokeswoman.
So a topic that I hear all about all the time from people all over the country is the topic of election integrity. Madison, I'm sure it's the same with you. And that's why I'm so excited that we have with us RNC legal spokesman Gates McGavick to really break down what our election integrity operation is and really give some details to people that are interested in this. Gates, thanks for joining us.
Gates, we're so excited to have you with us. If you could you jump right in and explain to people what is our election integrity department? When was it formed? What all is going on to protect election integrity at the RNC?
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. So the RNC launched a permanent full-time election integrity program several months ago now. And what we do basically is we have a team of lawyers, we have a team of political folks across the country, and we have a communications team as well. And we are working to make sure that elections in key swing states and really across the country are fair and honest and transparent, because the American people deserve nothing less.
That's right. And we've seen time and time again in many states across the country where there have been issues with election integrity, where things have been taken advantage of, where Democrats have tried to change the laws in a way that have not been constitutional. Can you talk about some of the things that you guys are doing when it comes to mail-in voting safeguards and lawsuits that we're currently involved in to help protect on that front?
Absolutely, yeah. So right now, the RNC this cycle is engaged in 72 cases of election integrity litigation in 20 states. And a lot of those are about mail voting. Look, we want to take advantage of every chance to vote. That's part of the RNC's Bank Your Vote initiative. But we have to make sure that mail voting is secure, because Democrats consistently try to get rid of key safeguards that make sure mail voting can be relied on. I'll give you an example. In New York, earlier this September, Governor Kathy Hochul signed a new law that basically would allow for no excuse mail voting across New York. Anyone can mail vote whenever with no security. It's worth mentioning New Yorkers voted on this policy in 2021 and rejected it. So when Governor Hochul signed that law to make mail voting less secure, the RNC led a huge Republican coalition with Congresswoman Elise Stefanik in the House, with the National Republican Congressional Committee, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, 20 plaintiffs in total, and we sued Governor Hochul about an hour after she signed the law. That lawsuit is already working its way through the courts, and it's kind of an example of how when Democrats try to go against their state constitution to make mail voting less secure, our legal team is right there. We're ready to file, and we'll take them to court for as long as it takes.
I think
something important to note before you jump in, Tommy, on what Gates just said is when you look back to when that referendum failed in New York, Democrats themselves were the ones admitting that it would be unconstitutional at that point to do what Kathy Hochul and the Democrats did, but they went ahead and did it anyways. So I think that's a very interesting case for people to keep an eye out on as that progresses in New York.
Yeah, I think there's a couple key points that I think were so important that you guys mentioned. One was that this was rejected by New York voters, so it's not supported by their constituents. They admitted it was unconstitutional when they did it, or that would be challenged in court. And then the third part of this is the speed with which the RNC election integrity team acted to hold Democrats accountable. And that aspect of popular support, common sense measures that are supported by the vast majority of the American people, I think voter ID is another example of this, right? Like, can you talk about voter ID, Republican efforts when it comes to mail-in ballots or otherwise to really establish a common sense safeguard when it comes to voter ID protections that Democrats seem determined to undermine?
Yeah, so let's be clear about voter ID, because this issue gets talked about a lot. More than 85% of Americans support voter ID, and that includes a majority of Democrats, a majority of minority voters, and of course, a large majority of Republicans. However, like you said, Democrats don't want to listen to the American people. For some reason, they want to make elections less secure, even though, you need an ID to go to a bar, to book a plane ticket, to buy a pet. You should need an ID to vote. And so the RNC right now is involved in over 30 cases of litigation across the country fighting to strengthen voter ID. I'll give you a recent example. In New Hampshire, New Hampshire passed a really good voter ID law. Democrats immediately sued over it because they don't want voter ID for some reason. And so we supported the state party financially and with lawyers. We supported the New Hampshire Republican Party, and we just won that case in court a couple weeks ago. So New Hampshire now has strong voter ID requirements in place. And that's just one of, again, several dozen cases that we're fighting on this issue, because look, the numbers don't lie. American people want voter ID, and we have the legal firepower to make sure they get it.
Yeah, and I think Republicans across the country have been talking about this for 20 years now. So this, I think,
Yeah.
is one of those top concerns for many of our voters. They go to the polls. They want to make sure that their vote counts. They want to make sure it counts
Hmm.
once, it counts right, that they don't see dead people on the voter rolls. And so when you continue to focus on these cases, I think that makes huge strides in taking steps forward on this issue that people have been concerned about for a very long time. And I know it's been a huge focus of the department. So it's been great to hear the updates coming from you and from others in the department about what's going on to help hold Democrats accountable who have pushed against voter ID, many times saying, pulling the race card, saying that it's racist to have voter ID, which simply is not the case and quite insulting, to be quite honest, to many minorities across this country. So we'll keep an eye on what you're doing with that as well.
I think that's always so egregious when they talk about their reasons for opposing voter ID, a measure that is, like Gates said, so widely supported. What's your response, Gates, when you hear Democrats saying that this is maybe a burden that people can't fulfill, saying that rural Americans don't know how to photocopy their ID, saying that minority Americans don't know how to get a photo ID? How do you respond to Democrats that really kind of make these bad faith arguments against a measure that's so widely supported?
I think Madison said it really well. It's really insulting. If you're talking down to the American people and you're saying because of your race or because of where you live, you're too dumb to go to a Kinko's and get a photocopy of your ID or go to the DMV and get a driver's license. That's just not the case. And it's because when it comes to election integrity and so many other issues, Democrats are all style, no substance. When they actually have to deal with the facts in the courtroom on these cases, they lose because, they only have talking points. They only have bad faith arguments. When it comes down to the substance of these issues, Republicans tend to win.
Yeah, and for Democrats, it's all about feelings, not facts. We've seen it time and time again, whether
Yeah.
on this issue or many of the other issues that we talk
Mhm.
about and that Tommy and I even talk about on Republican Rundown every week. They're always trying to play on people's emotions and ignore the facts because they recognize that when we start talking facts and we start putting numbers and statistics in there, they're going to lose.
And I
Yep.
think what that facts versus fiction, their feelings over facts, is also so important when it comes to what we're seeing in the White House currently, when you have Biden's DOJ putting the weight of the executive branch, really trying to undermine election integrity in a lot of ways, really without the facts to back it up. How do you combat or fight against in court the Biden's DOJ? How do you hold them accountable when they go out and target states for trying to pass common sense, widely supported election integrity measures?
It's a really, really good question, and it's something that I think people need to be talking about more. We all know that Biden's DOJ is, borderline out of control, targeting Americans for their political beliefs. And yeah, another tactic they use is when states pass good election integrity legislation, voter ID, bipartisan poll watching. The list goes on and on. When they pass those laws, Biden's DOJ will sue the state, and they do this because the DOJ has, tons of lawyers, tons of money, and they figure they can just bully these states into submission through, years of court battles. The RNC won't put up with that. What the RNC does is we immediately jump into those lawsuits, we intervene, and we help the state defend its laws. We are an ally in that fight. So right now, in both Georgia and Texas, both states passed good election integrity laws. The DOJ sued them. We jumped right in, and we're helping them fight back against the DOJ. We're in, I think, a combined 10 cases in those states defending their laws from the DOJ. And we've been successful. About a year and a half ago, the DOJ sued Florida over a good piece of election integrity legislation. We jumped into that fight right away. The court agreed with us about 4 or 5 months ago. So we have a record of beating the DOJ when they try to go after these states, and it's a fight we're going to keep fighting.
Gates, can you explain to people just a little bit? As an attorney myself, I know how long cases can take. And so often people see these cases pop up and they're not happy because it takes so long. Explain to people the process of going through some of these cases and how long it really does take sometimes to get to the final result. While obviously often successful, it does take time.
It absolutely takes time, and that's a really good point. I mean, these things don't happen overnight. We have cases we've been fighting for years. This case that just got decided in New Hampshire that I mentioned, we've been fighting that for a year. A couple months ago, we got a big victory against Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson because she was trying to restrict poll watchers. We've been fighting that for 2 years. I mean, you have many rounds of evidence, of witnesses being called, of interventions, appeals being filed. These are really important decisions, but they do take time.
So how does your department keep people up to date? It takes this amount of time for these cases to go through. Is there a way that your departments keep people up to date about what the RNC is doing, the actions that we're taking, so that the American people can see that we're engaged in this fight and in many cases winning this fight for election integrity?
Yeah, so we actually just about a month ago, we launched a new account on X, formerly known as Twitter. It's RNC Election Integrity, and it's at RNC Vote Protect. That's RNC Vote Protect on Twitter. And that's a great way to stay up to date with, the big court fights, the smaller court fights, the milestones that we're hitting, the stories that we're seeing that matter. And so, yeah, if you have an X account, please join us at RNC Vote Protect.
Well, I'll definitely be following. And one other thing that I think is super important to note, and we'd love to hear you talk about it, is non-citizen voting. This is something Democrats have been pushing across the country. Obviously, Americans are not for this. Our Republican voters across the country are very upset about this. You hear them talking about this all the time. And so I want you to jump in and just talk about what you've seen and obviously how we've gotten involved from an election integrity perspective.
Yeah, so it's almost too ridiculous to imagine. There are Democrats who are working really hard right now to make sure that non-US citizens can vote in US elections. And look, let's take a bird's eye view here. We don't happen to have a southern border right now. We have millions of illegal immigrants coming into the country, many of whom we have no idea where they are, how long they've been here. So those two things together obviously are really problematic. So when Democrats try to pass laws to let non-citizens vote, the RNC, again, we jump into the courtroom when we have to. In 2022, New York City passed a law saying that 900,000 non-citizens could vote in New York City elections. We sued the city of New York. We won. The New York Supreme Court agreed with us. We stopped that from happening. We're fighting litigation right now in Vermont, Arizona as well to ensure that non-citizens can vote. It's especially important in Arizona, being a border state that has suffered so much in the border crisis, making sure that only U.S. citizens are voting in Arizona elections. It's really important work. 90% of the American people, 90%, do not want non-citizens to vote in U.S. elections. Democrats don't care about that. We do. So we're going to keep devoting resources to making sure that American elections are decided by U.S. citizens.
It's just mind-boggling to me that that's a controversial opinion. But it's actually not. Like you mentioned, 90% of Americans do not want non-citizens voting in American elections. It's only controversial amongst the Democratic Party. And really, when you think of this in combination, you have a Democratic Party that's trying to undermine voter ID while also letting non-citizens vote. I don't understand how they don't see that as a recipe for disaster. So when you see all these Democrats doing this, how do you respond to Americans that are worried that their vote's not going to count? Because seeing what the Democrats are doing really is concerning. And so what's your message to Americans out there that are concerned about this and really don't know how to respond themselves or worried about their vote being counted? How do you respond to those people? What do you say to those people that are worried about it?
I would say three things. Number one, some of those concerns are legitimate. What Democrats are doing is really dangerous to our system. Number two, the RNC is there to fight it. We're spending millions of dollars on this. We have dozens of attorneys across the country. We have staff on the ground in key states. We're filing litigation. We are there to protect our elections. And number three, vote the Democrats out. They can't undermine our elections if they're not in office trying to pass these insane laws. Vote Republican in 2024, and a lot of these problems solve themselves.
Well, amen to that. Another point I want to piggyback off of when you talk about assuring confidence in our voters, making sure that people feel comfortable voting. Obviously, we're doing a big push on our Bank Your Vote effort. This is something I'm talking about nationally as we travel the country for debates and continuing to talk to voters and media about this. It really couldn't be more important for people to get out and vote early. And I always use my election as the Republican nominee in Ohio's 13th congressional district last year as a good example of this. We lost that early vote pretty heavily to the Democrat. A lot of voters in my district that were Republican did not feel comfortable voting early. And so with Bank Your Vote, we're trying to change that. We're trying to get them to recognize the value in getting out on that very first possible day in your state to vote and the money that it saves, the resources that can then go and be targeted towards independent or Democrat votes that we may not have gotten otherwise, significant resources, as a matter of fact. Can you talk a little bit about how you press this issue to people and how you can ensure that confidence in our Republican voters that you're talking to that do still have concerns, that they look back to other elections and things that have happened and don't feel comfortable voting early?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I think, Bank Your Vote has two parts. protect your vote and bank your vote. The RNC wasn't really allowed to do this kind of election integrity work for a long time due to something called a consent decree, a Democrat court order. Now that we can, we have the resources and infrastructure to make sure that voting early is safe, to make sure that mail voting is safe. We are in the field protecting your vote. We are going to have tens of thousands of poll watchers and poll workers on the ground across the country. We're going to have lawyers in the room when it matters, monitoring everything to make sure we can solve issues if they do come up. So I would just say that the RNC understands the concerns, and we are spending millions of dollars. We are putting people on the ground to ensure that there's a safety net around early voting, around mail voting, and to ensure that banking your vote is secure.
And I think it's one of what the Democrats don't want Republicans to do is they don't want Republicans to vote. So ultimately, by not voting, it's a giant gift to the Democratic Party that's actively trying to undermine election integrity on so many levels. So the best way to really combat this is to vote and to vote early. And I think, Madison, just to piggyback off the point you're making about the resources, that's so important because I've talked to so many Republicans that say, I'm going to vote anyway on election day. Why do I need to vote early? But I was talking with a lot of the people in our political department here, and they talk about the number of resources that they save, something like 6 times the resources they save if someone votes on the first day of early voting as opposed to voting on election day, which means all of those resources are freed up to go after that voter that hasn't voted in a recent election. That is so important. It's such an important part of our infrastructure, our ground game. It really is, and it'll be such a detriment to the Democratic Party as we turn out all those Republican voters. So it really is the single best thing you can do to beat the Democrats is to vote. And I'm so glad to hear that the election integrity is a part of that Bank Your Vote program to make sure that when people vote early, they can vote early with confidence.
And you're talking, Tommy, as you mentioned, about a $25+ difference. We may spend $5 to target a Republican who votes early versus over $30 if they wait until election day. So each individual voter that votes early, that's saving amount of money that can then go towards, as you mentioned, those voters who maybe we wouldn't have had the resources to target otherwise. It is so very important and really can change an election. When you look at how close, even look back to 2020, at how close some of those states were, and that would have very, very significantly changed the Electoral College for President Trump and would have resulted in a Republican victory. We look at Republican nominees across the country, like myself and others, that we would have seen big shifts in the ultimate results if we were to have had better early voting. And so, while as Republicans, some of us aren't huge fans of early voting, wish we didn't have quite as much of it or as wide-ranging ability to do it, but this is the game that the Democrats are playing. This is the law, and until it changes, we have to all play the same game or else we will lose. So Republicans have to come together, and Republicans have to make sure that they vote early if we want to win.
That's so important. Gates, thank you so much for coming on the Republican Rundown to break all this down. It's so important. You guys are doing so much. Again, that's at RNC Vote Protect for all of those updates. Can't wait to see what you guys have in store next and to see all those updates on cases that are already going through the courts.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's a really important issue and great to have the chance to talk about it. RNC Vote Protect.
Thanks, Gates. We'll be following.
Thanks.